in His holy Catholic Church through Scripture, tradition, and the Catechism. And now, your host, Jim Higgins.
It is great to be back with you on The Simple Truth, where we consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the pure, strong heart of St. Joseph. Today is Testimony Tuesday, where we bring you real, live, firsthand testimonial accounts of the life-giving reality of Jesus and His Catholic Church. Our guest today is Ross McKnight. He is a Catholic husband, father, and business owner of Backwater Foie Gras. And you can find it at backwaterfoiegras.com. Ross McKnight, thank you for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, great blessing to have you with us. And so we always begin at the beginning. Let's start with childhood. What was your early life like, your family, the culture that you grew up in?
Right. Well, I remember a lot of quiet moments as a child because there were just two of us. My parents were only able to have a couple of children, myself and my sister. So it was quiet. We lived in a neighborhood that was really just overshadowed with trees. So there were trees everywhere, and I'd go and run around in the woods, and it was just peaceful. It was quiet. My parents came back to the Catholic faith when I was around 7 years old. And so from then on, they were extremely involved, as is kind of that revert's zeal, right? And my mother was very involved with our parish. She started the youth program, which grew from there for many years and still exists today. And my father, very involved in a multitude of ways with the parish. And so we were pretty much always at church. It seemed like always around the parish. Mainly, of course, because I had to be, because my parents were so involved. But I think over time, especially into my teenage years, that grew into my own expression, my own desire to be Catholic, to make the faith my own. So I remember, especially in high school, sitting in a sociology class, which is a terrible subject, thinking, is the idea of atheism logically sound? And I think that internal dialogue lasted about an hour. And so I still to this day don't understand. I think atheism is more of like just an expression of anger at God, because it's not fundamentally tenable as a position. But that is like a 20-second overview, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Yeah, we like to follow the sacramental grace a bit if we can. So does that mean, were you baptized as an infant, or did baptism take place after your parents came on back to the Catholic faith?
Yeah, so somehow I was baptized as an infant at St. Dominic's in New Orleans. And yeah, I think both my parents, they had grown away from the faith, fallen away from the faith in their young adulthood. And then once they started having children, started to turn back to the tradition, right? Couldn't get away from it. They were Catholics, whether they liked it or not. And so they wanted their child baptized in the Catholic Church. And then those things slowly brought them back to a more regular practice. But yeah, and they're certainly some of the holiest people I know. So.
Wow, that's a blessing. And so at 7 years old, as they're coming back and really getting serious about living the faith, that's a pretty good age for you for that to take place. So you would have been right around the time where usually it's First Holy Communion in most dioceses. And so anything that you recall from that experience of your parents getting serious about the faith and then getting prepared for confession, first penance, first Holy Communion, and everything surrounding that. What was that experience like?
So it must have been a pretty rapid reversion, because I remember I wasn't late for Holy Communion or anything like that. It was at 7 years old, I was with everybody else going through the preparation for the sacrament. So I remember, I guess 7 years old is kind of a benchmark for me, because I remember that's when they had their marriage blessed by the church. And whereas prior to that, when you're very young, your memory doesn't serve very well to kind of allow you to recall all those events. But 7 years old is kind of a benchmark, right? So, but I was not. Yeah, all I remember, I have some vague memories of like, some evangelical friends of theirs coming over and doing like these felt characters on this board teaching us Bible stories. But I don't. And then I remember going with my mother to some evangelical some Bible study when I was very young, just kind of being carted around all over the place. But other than that, yeah, most of my memories are of just being, a Catholic family. So,
and how was the formation? What was the choice there? Was it public school? Was it Catholic school? Was it homeschool? How did that all work out?
Sure. So, in that era, I don't think there was, at least in our circles, much suspicion of private school and public school. So I remember we started off, I was at just a Christian, elementary school. And then I think there were some anti-Catholic things said there, and they moved me to the local parish school, St. Peter's Catholic School. And I was there from 3rd grade through 7th grade, and then moved on to St. Paul's School, a Catholic high school in my area, from 8th grade to sophomore year. Sophomore year, I left. I finished at public school, just going through one of those, events that many teenagers go through, and needed a fresh start somewhere. So I left the all boys Catholic school and went to the public school. Although, looking back, it's strange. I guess sad to say, while the quality of education was certainly better as far as, rigor at the private Catholic school, it wasn't that much of a shock to go to public school, but it should be more of a shock to go to public school. So, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Help us understand a little bit more, because the culture in Louisiana, it's unique, right? And so, and especially if you were in rural Louisiana at this point, I would imagine that's even more rich with Catholic tradition and just a different sort of way of life. Any way you can kind of explain that for us?
Sure. Oh man, Louisiana is something. It's Louisiana was Louisiana before the United States was the United States, right? And Louisiana was still Louisiana while the United States was becoming what it is, and also after, right? So it's a colony of New France. It's New France. It's New Spain. It was back and forth, right, for years. But the French culture really was the dominant one. And it comes from a couple of sources. One of the big ones that everyone will know, at least to some degree, at least they know the word Cajun, right? And that comes from the Acadians, who were actually predominantly from the region of the Vendée in France, that's a modern department of France called the Vendée, but it's the province of Poitou. And many families came from Poitou to Nova Scotia. And then, of course, during the Grand Dérangement, the Great Deportation, right, the Acadians were dispersed. And so they were brought to various places. But one of the places that they left and journeyed to in a more self-determined way was South Louisiana. And they were led by a famous figure named Beausoleil Broussard. And Beausoleil was also sort of their captain while they were fighting a kind of guerrilla war against the British in Canada, because they would not give up their faith, right? And they would not swear fealty to a Protestant king. And so they took this long, hard road down to Louisiana to start life anew. And the governor at the time, his surname was Dabadie, not Dabadoo, though. He sent a priest to the Acadians. And the first thing that they did was, of course, to build a Catholic church. And so the famous St. Martin of Tours church is still there in St. Martinville today. And that was, just this beautiful story of Catholic resilience, Catholic culture, and the crusader spirit, right? We won't give up our faith just to protect ourselves. And we won't submit to another culture. And so they kind of went into exile, right? Like the Israelites through the wilderness, and found their promised land, if it can be called that, with all the mosquitoes and alligators and water moccasins. So you have the Acadians, and but there's so many more influences, but yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. And my sense is, from the folks that I have met from Louisiana, especially southern Louisiana, south of Lafourche comes to mind, meeting some men from there, and just such a family orientation, so gregarious. Anything you want to speak to that? Where does that come from? What is that like growing up in the midst of all that?
Yeah. Oh goodness. The food is one thing that comes to mind, certainly. That was something I grew up with. The music, of course, and life centered around the parish, right? The Catholic faith, really. And that being sort of the source of all social engagement.
Awesome. Yeah, our guest today, Ross McKnight. He is a Catholic husband, father, business owner of Backwater Foie Gras, backwaterfoiegras.com. An easier way to get to it, if you're not sure about the spelling there of foie gras, backwaterduckfarm.com. We're going to get to his experience as a business owner and hear the story, the background of all of that, and also some hot water that has recently stirred up that Ross has navigated quite well. We're going to be right back. Stay tuned.
Hello, this is Steve Gleason with your 1-minute tool for Catholic evangelism. Here's the question for your non-Catholic friend. How much havoc would be caused at your church if your pastor brought a big statue of St. Peter or St. Paul and placed them in the sanctuary? Well, here's your 3 best friendship tools for Catholic evangelism. Number 1, history's on the side of the Catholic Church. Christian art in many forms dates way back to about 120 AD, and so do those various Christian symbols which we still see today. A dove, a fish, a lamb. Why are those okay? Secondly, the Bible, Exodus, Numbers, and Ezekiel. All these books show God telling Moses, David, or Ezekiel to carve out images of angels that were used in worship. And thirdly, a tough comeback, especially for my guy friends. Does Cooperstown, Canton, or Cleveland mean anything to you? Yep, the Hall of Fame location's filled with statues, jerseys, bats, and balls. Memorabilia is a $37 billion industry, but you say, don't bring a statue into my church. Well, how many of you guys have admired one of those bronze statues of an athlete? I'd rather stare at St. Peter's, Paul, and Mary in my church, and I'm not talking about the old folk band.
Each weekday from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern, the Station of the Cross brings you Mother Miriam Live.
Don't let circumstances determine your life and your peace and your love and your sacrifice.
Tune in from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern for Mother Miriam Live on the Station of the Cross and our free iCatholic Radio mobile app. You can also watch the video stream every day on Facebook or on YouTube. The Station of the Cross began broadcasting in Buffalo, New York in 1999. Since then, our listening areas have multiplied and expanded into several states. While our mission is to grow the Catholic faith through radio and other media outlets, our apostolate is supportive of but independent from your local diocese. Through your generosity, we are able to inspire countless listeners with the gospel and help lead them to a parish to be spiritually nourished by the sacraments.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here. Testimony Tuesday with our guest, Ross McKnight. He is a Catholic husband, father, and business owner of Backwater Foie Gras, backwaterfoiegras.com, also backwaterduckfarm.com. We'll get into that a little bit later, but we left off, Ross, with I want to go back into the high school years for just a moment. I'm guessing this is the high school years when the sacrament of confirmation would have popped up. I don't know exactly what it is in the diocese that you were in, but for many, it's somewhere in the high school years. And I want to throw this out there. I just happen to have the Baltimore Catechism sitting here. Open it up to 672. Why is confirmation so called? Confirmation is so called from its chief effect, which is to strengthen or render us more firm in whatever belongs to our faith and religious duties. And of course, this is where the term soldiers of Christ comes from, which is what we truly are. and what this sacrament is meant to make us into. And so we want to live that. And so can you talk a little bit about receiving the sacrament of confirmation? When was that? What was that experience like, if you have any memories or stories from it? And then as far as the effect of it goes, is there anything you can share about your high school years or college years or whatever years going forward where you would have called on the strength of that sacrament of confirmation?
Sure. You know, it's funny. Confirmation is, I don't know. I kind of wish that I had received confirmation earlier, you know, because the adolescent years are so difficult. And I certainly hope for my children, I hope to have them confirmed, you know, pretty early on. And to give them that fortitude through the adolescent years, give them that fortitude through high school, because that is, as we all know, because we all experience it, such a difficult time. And so many, you know, the conflict that you encounter with the world and with people who don't share your values when you're very young still, and still impressionable and still being formed, and when you really need that strength. And so I received confirmation, I believe, 15 or 16 years old. And I remember sitting in confirmation class because it was the strangest thing. And I don't know if this is idiosyncratic to Louisiana, but because Catholicism is so much in the culture, you know, it's been here for hundreds of years. It's not new, right? The nations that colonized Louisiana were Catholic nations. And so it's something that is still very important to people, where we have, you know, very little room, if any at all, on Christmas and Easter in our churches, because all the people who want to identify as Catholics, of course, come back and to those two masses, right, during the year, which obviously we're glad that they have that tie, and we just want those sleepwalkers to be awakened a little bit and return to having some zeal for the faith. But that's kind of the same, that was a similar experience to me. Analogically, sort of the experience for me preparing for confirmation was going to these classes and being surrounded by all kinds of people I'd never met before. Even though, you know, I spent so much time at the parish and at all kinds of different parish events, just people I'd never seen before, but their parents wanted them confirmed because it's an important part of the culture in Louisiana to be identified as Catholic. So it was already kind of a challenge just going through preparing for the sacrament, because I was actually encountering people there who didn't know the faith and didn't even know why they were there in formation for confirmation. So it's I actually have kind of strange memories about confirmation. You know, it was actually kind of a tumultuous time, because the people I was being confirmed with, I don't know if they knew the first reason why they were there, as I mentioned. So, but because I had received formation already at home and through, you know, the youth group functions and through talks, etc., at the parish, I was, you know, ready to be confirmed and very, I think I was thinking seriously about it. I chose St. Pio of Pietrelcina as my confirmation saint, and he is, of course, a Franciscan, a Capuchin. And what ended up being interesting about that is I eventually, just recently, was invested in the Third Order of St. Francis. And so he's, while I have had moments where I didn't understand why St. Pio always looked so concerned and so angry, and was always wondering why he was looking at me that way, I've come to love him, certainly, and also respect him, because he had requested a dispensation from Paul VI to not celebrate the Novus Ordo. He didn't want to celebrate the Novus Ordo, and so he never did, actually, and that's something people don't know about St. Pio. But so my I guess journey towards confirmation was really learning more about St. Pio, because I was so fascinated by the saint. And I remember, I don't know if it was before or after confirmation, I was reading his letters. and became, I guess, just really delved into the personality of the man and into his spiritual life, and grew an affection for him. In the moment of confirmation, I only remember a couple things, a lot of red and then going up before the bishop. But obviously it's had an effect on my life. And despite all of the struggles that I've been through personally, through college, it's sort of like one of those things where it by the graces that you received, right? That confirmation has an effect. And so if you have any doubts in that regard, you can always look to the graces. Some people I know there's been a lot of scandal in the last couple of years about baptisms and this and the other thing, and people wondering if they've been validly baptized. But you can also look at the graces you've received in your life as sort of a signal. And so I've definitely seen that, obviously, in my life, especially lately, as regards the sacraments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Entirely. But that.
Yes, yeah, and I agree. I mean, the age of when one ought to be confirmed, it ought to be younger, much younger. And why wouldn't it be? Right? If we believe in the graces of the sacrament, why would we want to withhold this from our little children? And so, many dioceses, I think it's about 13 now, have gone back to the restored order of the sacraments. And you can have your children confirmed at a much earlier age. I've looked into it myself as a father, thinking about it and saying, well, this is incredibly important, a high priority. If I have to move to maybe a diocese that has this restored order, maybe, I need to be open to doing that, which I have been. The Lord hasn't provided that path to this point, but certainly it's a good question for fathers, for mothers to be considering. Let's stay on that theme. You are a married man, a husband and a father yourself, Ross. Can you share anything with us about any discernment in terms of vocation? Was there a lot surrounding a prayerful discernment of vocation for you, and anything that you can share with us about your calling to marriage and family life?
Oh man, that's ongoing, that call, right? It's yeah, I met my wife in college. We had both, I guess, been thinking of two different paths really when we met. She was considering becoming a nun or a religious sister, and I was thinking about going into Carmel, which would have been a very different life for me, with many different experiences. But we met each other, and I convinced her that, maybe she wanted to marry me instead of going into a religious order. God forgive me. But we got married shortly after college. I was 23, she was 22. And we had our first child about a year later. We were living in Texas at the time, where I'd found, my first quote unquote real job. And we were renting a house. And man, it's been a really quite a ride. It's, I don't know. I try to take it one day at a time, because while I know I could almost lay out precisely what I ought to be doing on a daily basis to be a good father, but, very rarely do I check all those boxes any given day. And you might be familiar, I don't know. It's a struggle. Because we're dealing with our own internal turmoil and trying to work on our own personal sanctity. And sometimes what ends up happening is you think too much about your problems that are going on inside of you. But we strive for a family prayer life every night, praying the rosary together, beginning the day with a series of prayers with the Angelus. And the children, we go to Mass, of course, Sundays, and we have a novena going on right now at our parish to Our Lady of Mount Carmel, because her commemoration was recently. So they're also having that experience of growing up with their connections being deeply intertwined with the church community and with going to Mass, with going to the sacraments, and with celebrations, that if we're going to do something social, oftentimes it's connected in some way to the faith, or to people who, of course, are living the same life that we're striving to live. And so that's how we try to foster that. It's just by, keeping the faith central to their experiences. And that allows us, of course, always to make reference to the desires of our Lord and Our Lady when it comes to, or often to make reference to those things when it's time for discipline. And we homeschool, I think that's the route right now. I don't, if you can do it, that's what we ought to do. If we can do it, not everybody can, of course. There are many different scenarios in which it's not possible, but that's the ideal, because it's just a war. We're in a war right now, and it's not even a war by analogy or as a metaphor. We're in a very real, constant war every day for our children's souls. So hopefully that's a little bit of an overview.
Yeah, very well said. I'm sure many can relate as you're speaking it. And a great example of really putting the priority on the most important things, and that is a formation in the faith, a formation in reality, right? We need to raise our children up in understanding that this is true. Jesus and his Catholic Church is the real deal. And number one, that's going to be our witness. And then also, the ongoing formation by God's grace that hopefully we can provide. But Ross McKnight is with us, and he's a Catholic husband, father, also business owner of Backwater Foie Gras. When we get back, we're going to get into the theme of the business. How did that all come to be? What's the backstory there? What is Ross's role? And then that's going to lead us into another strain of what Ross was just talking about, which is the war that we are in. We are in a spiritual war. There's no doubt about it. I'm sure if you're listening and you are a faithful Catholic to any degree, you are very much understanding that manifestation of the spiritual war that is all around us. And that is a constant discernment as well, to try to figure out, okay, Lord, what am I called to do in the midst of these challenges of our time, especially to live our vocation well, but also to do the good work that we are called to do. In the meantime, if you want to check out the website, go to backwaterduckfarm.com. We'll be right back.
This is Life News Radio. I'm Jim Anderson. Indiana is the first state to release abortion complication data from 2022. It doesn't look good for abortion. 1 death of both a mother and child, 58 surgeries, 4 blood transfusions, and 2 hospitalizations are listed among abortion complications, the vast number from chemical abortions. There has been no evidence to support abortion activists' claims that pro-life laws kill women. Iowa legislators are making good on their promise to create a new abortion ban. The bill has been introduced, and the special session created by Governor Kim Reynolds opens Tuesday. Despite new radical abortion measures, abortions are down in Vermont over 10%. Counting only in-state abortions, it's a 16% drop. The abortion industry had anticipated an increase in abortions. This is Life News Radio. Persecution around the world has manifested itself through the centuries, but it is worse today than ever before. Aid to the Church in Need and its donors have been there to help since 1947, never abandoning the Church or her most vulnerable children. Will you stand up for your faith and accompany our brothers and sisters on their spiritual journey? Visit churchinneed.org. churchinneed.org. In other state news, a St. Louis, Missouri doctor wants to eliminate strong state abortion restrictions and is proposing abortion-friendly changes to the state's constitution. Maine is about to become a late-term abortion state. New legislation legalizes abortion up to birth. And Seattle King County prosecutors say Washington state does not recognize unborn victims of violence. Murder charges in the death of a 32-week pregnant mother last month list only 1 victim. For pro-life headlines delivered to your email address daily, sign up at lifenews.com. This has been Life News Radio.
The Simple Truth Testimony Tuesday. Jim Havens here with our guest, Ross McKnight, Catholic husband, father, business owner of Backwater Foie Gras, backwaterfoiegras.com, also backwaterduckfarm.com will get you there. So pretty impressive business that you have. Took a look at the website. Very cool. I mean, it's definitely something that, I only know about foie gras because of my wife, who is more knowledgeable in these areas of culinary expertise. I'm pretty simple in this way, but it was never one for liver. But she said, "Hey, you got to try some duck liver." We went out to a farm to table restaurant one time. It was on the menu. I was feeling adventurous. I went for it, and I got to say, it was great. So foie gras, if you haven't had it before, check it out. And again, the website, backwaterfoiegras.com, backwaterduckfarm.com. Ross, tell us about the backstory of this business and your calling to enter into it and your role there.
All right. So I was working in finance at the time, although my wife and I had this dream, if you will, to start a farm or to live in the country. And we really wanted to be involved in our children's lives and be there, as constantly as we could, or as often as we could for them. And so while I was doing well in finance, I decided that from the very beginning, I actually told the gentleman who hired me that I had a goal to start a farm in 3 years from the date that I would start working at the firm. And so that's there. I think he probably still has that in my file, wherever that is. But it just so happened that even though I was doing very well at the firm, but I was actually kind of getting caught up in that I was doing well and that it was working out and that I could provide well for my family, and I was considering staying. But providentially, an autoimmune disease that I have was progressively getting worse, I think, with especially stress is a huge trigger for autoimmune diseases. So with the stress of the work, I was, my health was definitely getting worse and my condition degrading. And so eventually I had to go and get some major surgeries done. And that put me out of work for a long, long time. In fact, I ended up being basically disabled for about a year because the first two surgeries didn't go correct as they should have. And I ended up with a lot of complications and had to end up going up to Cleveland Clinic to have both surgeries revised. That was a little over a year of my life, just kind of of medical crises. But it provided me that opportunity that can often happen in such situations, which is, well, you're looking at your life and you're thinking, if I recover from this, I'd like to do something that, is as ideal as it could possibly be. And it's kind of now or never. So even when I was still suffering from those first surgeries, not having gone correctly and having an infection and things like that, I remember I was walking around with realtors, these properties out in the country, and having to sit down under a tree or something and rest because I couldn't walk very far to catch my breath. And we were looking for property. We were looking for a place that could become our farm. And eventually we ended up buying this place where we are now. We bought it together with my parents, who also live on the property with us. So they have their house and we have ours. And we have two friends from Toulouse, and they were inspirational in helping us to choose foie gras because we needed something that would allow us to approximate something of a living, because farming on a small scale, especially doing traditional, more artisanal farming is, it's out of style, if you will. It's not the food industry, the food production model is at war with that sort of approach. So we chose foie gras because it's you'd have to be slightly crazy to do it, to figure out how to do it in the first place, especially in the U.S., because there's not the there's not the infrastructure there. We have to import our equipment, and it's difficult to obtain the knowledge. So we did, though, manage to do it. We actually raised 20 ducks in our small lot at our old house and figured out how to fatten those ducks before we ever moved out here to the country. But once we knew that we could, we secured this property, and we've been here since September of 2019. So.
Well, incredible. So it sounds very romantic, a romantic kind of life there with the parents on the farm and everything. But set us straight in terms of, well, you're already talking a bit about the sufferings that you have endured. Share with us, I guess, break through some of that romanticism that maybe we have about life on a farm. Maybe I'm sure that there are glorious aspects, but the cross, I'm sure, is still present. Anything you want to share just about your sense? I mean, the Sacred Heart of Jesus, obviously very prominent for you. You've got the badge on right now for those who are watching us on video. Anything you want to share with us about just the cross and how to embrace it, how to offer it?
Yes, farming is a penance. And if we look at Genesis, we can see why. And it was also a vocation given to us by God to tend and to keep the earth. And then, of course, once we fell, to bring forth fruit from the earth with much toil, and dealing with weeds and brambles all the time. And that is farming to a T. And it is beautiful. I mean, but you do have to remember to lift your head up and see the beauty, because the hours are not the hours of an office job, right? They're not the hours of a typical job in ordinary society. And so there are many, many things that you'll have to do throughout a day. And oftentimes your plans will be dashed by crises or emergencies because you're dealing with so many living beasts that you have to care for. And they do all manner of unruly things. We recently had the pigs get out. Over a series of a couple of days, the pigs kept getting out of their pen because they found out that the pain was only momentary from the shock. And so we had to build something much stouter for them and go and get fencing materials while they were running around our property. So crises happen all the time. And sometimes they push your plans back into the night. And so you can be up working quite late doing things that are physically intensive. So again, farming is a penance, but it is good. And also penance is good. And so I found that farming has allowed me to embrace more and more, hopefully, although growing and learning in anything is never linear, the tradition of the church and also the liturgy of life. Because as you begin to have to make your living according to the seasons, you also begin to understand the liturgical seasons in a much deeper way. And you begin to understand, for instance, Lent in a much deeper way. Because what ends up happening, at least, or why Lent makes so much sense historically, is because if you were to preserve your meat, right, for the winter, well, right about the time you're going to start running out of meat is when Lent begins. Preserved meat, right? So, well, you got to fast anyway, so you might as well do it for a reason. And then, of course, when Easter comes around, it's about time to slaughter the spring lambs. So everything just becomes so poignantly apparent and meaningful. And a lot of the time when we're living the very modern lifestyle that we've created for ourselves, we don't really understand the liturgical seasons so much because our lives can be relatively static as far as fulfilling our needs. We can always go to the grocery store. We can always run out to eat somewhere. We can do this or that. And also, if we're going to an office, we're going to the same place every day, at least it might not be an office. We could just kind of get into this monotonous routine where the liturgical seasons change, but our lives don't necessarily change. And so it becomes harder to attune ourselves in prayer and penance and preparation during those liturgical seasons because our lives don't really match up in any kind of perceivable way, physically, at least on the physical plane. So farming is actually very beautiful in that sense that you very much do live the liturgy of life, but it's also very hard. So be forewarned if you are thinking of getting into farming. You can be wiped out if the weather changes just so, you can lose 50 ducks, for instance, overnight and in an instant. And it's something to be aware of. They're great risks, great rewards, but great risks too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great stuff here with Ross McKnight. He is the business owner of Backwater Foie Gras, backwaterfoiegras.com. Also, backwaterduckfarm.com will get you there. Ross, we've got a few minutes before we hit the break. Can you lead us in, give us an introduction into the recent persecution that you have faced? Help people to understand, I guess, what the story is, and then we can get into it on the other side as well, as far as you've got an amazing testimony of the grace of God and how he has been just present within all of this. But can you set up the story for us?
Certainly. So, well, we haven't particularly been subtle about the fact that we're Catholic. This is Louisiana after all, so you should expect to run into Catholics and into what they believe. But it was, I believe, a few days before June 6th. It was a Friday, and I made an Instagram post explaining that June is dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And as you may know, as many may know, it was Pius IX in 1856, I believe, that officially dedicated the month of June to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And that it is not, of course, a month to celebrate a false pride, and those were the two words that I used. And then I offered some quote-unquote antidotes to a false pride, and this was on an Instagram post in our farm Instagram account, and laid out, some of you could do a novena to the Sacred Heart, start your devotion, pray the rosary. Of course, I suggest doing it in French because we're in Louisiana and we need to recapture our culture. And then I had written an essay about localism and about the Louisiana patrimony. So this is kind of the background. The weekend passed normally, but then the beginning of the following week, as I was actually processing some birds preparing for deliveries, I got notification from two of our substantial accounts that we'd be losing them. They wouldn't be receiving their orders. One of them had agreed on a certain number of birds every week through the summer, so it was kind of a big deal for us. And we still have chickens piling up, so we're still figuring that out. But that's kind of the background. There are reasons. One mentioned that, because of my homophobic beliefs, which is such a funny word to me, homophobia. But the other one had mentioned that, that person themselves, they were a member of that particular quote unquote community. And so, and proudly so, interesting thing to be proud of. They would be, and so they would not be doing business with me either. So that's kind of the background of that's the setup, mm-hmm. And then things unfolded rather interestingly after that.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I guess in just maybe less than a minute that we have here before we hit the break, what about folks? What about the retail side of the business? Can folks, they can go online and order things? Is this something that is a pretty reasonable thing to do from all over the country? Do they need to be close to Louisiana? How does the shipping work? Do you recommend everybody take a look? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so it is, we do have a merchandise site. So if you're interested in wearing our brand, you can do that. We have merchandise that ships. The food products are a different story. It will cost you 3 to 4 times the price of the product to ship it to you. So we're not really doing shipping right now. However, we do have an option. If you want to donate a chicken to the local food bank or to a family in need, you can do that. You can buy one on their website and we'll bring it to them. So that's an option that we do have.
Okay, very cool. All right, and the website is backwaterfoiegras.com. Also, backwaterduckfarm.com will get you there. So very cool. Yeah, you can be in solidarity and get some merchandise there from Backwater Foie Gras. Also, donate a chicken to a local food bank. Very, very good idea. I mean, this is good food, farm-raised, wonderful food. To be able to donate that to some folks in need seems like a wonderful idea. We'll be right back.
Here at the Station of the Cross, we proudly bring the truths of the Catholic faith to countless listeners through radio and mobile devices, and we're grateful for the feedback we've received.
I discovered the Station of the Cross rather providentially a year ago and have been a loyal listener ever since. I can't overestimate the value of the station, what it's made a difference in my life in terms of making me better informed Catholic. It has enriched my faith, consoled me during tough times, and made me laugh on several occasions. I commend the important work of this great apostolate.
I'm a stay-at-home mom. I listen to the radio, and if I can listen to something that brings me closer to God, closer to Jesus Christ, then it's the most beautiful thing.
If you've been blessed by listening to the Station of the Cross, let us know. Call 1-877-888-6279, extension 112. Then share your testimonial with us.
Our family had been going through crisis. Little by little, we just found ourselves drifting completely away. I was afraid to go back. I mean, I cried the first time I received the sacraments again. Cried because I was back and because I had allowed God to become a part of me again. It's united our family. There's peace in our home that we didn't have before.
If you've been away from the Catholic Church for any reason, visit CatholicsComeHome.org today.
Our bumper magnets are a great way to promote the gospel as proclaimed through Catholic radio. We hear all the time from new listeners who were introduced to the station through a bumper magnet. We'd be happy to send you a bumper magnet so that others can come to know our Lord. Just go to thestationofthecross.com and find our bumper magnet request button under the About tab. That's thestationofthecross.com under the About tab.
The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Ross McKnight on this Testimony Tuesday. Ross is a Catholic husband, father, business owner, Backwater Foie Gras, backwaterfoiegras.com, backwaterduckfarm.com gets you there as well. Ross is also Third Order Franciscan. He shared earlier in the show. If we have time, we want to ask him about that as well. But following up on the persecution that you've recently faced, Ross. So you lost some big orders because of your standing up for the Sacred Heart of Jesus in the month of June on social media, Instagram to be exact. And so, and also, making a comment, a critical comment about the depravity of the world when it comes to trying to pervert what is meant to be a good and holy month dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and trying to flip that upside down. It really is a demonic attack in our time that we are seeing this so prolific, this assault called so-called Pride Month, where even the professional sports teams, almost all of them, including this into their events, into their logos, so corporations bending over for all of this, people doing whatever it takes so that I guess the woke mob doesn't come after them. So you better do what they say. You're a guy just naturally living your faith, living your life. You're just, sharing your faith and your thought there on social media, and then you lose some big orders. It also opened some doors, though. You were able to go and proclaim the Sacred Heart of Jesus in some pretty big media outlets. One that I saw you on was EWTN's The World Over with Raymond Arroyo. And you made some comments there about really the graces that you had received in the midst of all of this. Anything that you can share with us now?
Yes, that was extraordinary. And I can only attribute it to a couple of things. I can say to some degree I was willing to suffer. To another, certainly in another sense, I was very frustrated and very distraught when it did occur that we that lost that business, especially because that same evening we were having to prepare to receive more birds the next day to raise for slaughter, many of which were supposed to go to one of these restaurants that we no longer had as a client. And so, but the graces were extraordinary, and the prayers, of course, that were offered on our behalf, of course. And so that's all I can attribute it to, is that God wanted the Sacred Heart to be promoted. Our Lord wanted his Sacred Heart to be promoted. And so it was. And these very people who, of course, broke their agreements with us, well, by doing so, they promoted the Sacred Heart as well. And I believe that is the 8th promise. Is it the 8th promise of the Sacred Heart, that those who promote my heart, their names shall be written on my heart? And so I hope in some way, because they've promoted the Sacred Heart, now they'll be haunted by Christ and one day convert. But but that's my hope for them. But the graces have been extraordinary. And I remember one moment, especially because I was in no way prepared for these events. I was no way prepared to be speaking on Fox and Friends. And my heart was beating like crazy before I went on. But I remember thinking, how does the Sacred Heart beat, right? And because it's all, peace is what's being offered to us. And if God wants to use us, well, then he'll offer us the graces and we have to accept them. And oftentimes, like I mentioned before, we think about all the thoughts racing through our heads, and we fixate on these troubling thoughts. But we don't have to do that. It's an option. It's a choice. And so if we don't, and we instead think about the graces that are being offered us and we accept them and think about what's being asked of us, then we can be effective vessels and effective servants of our Lord. And so that's been the most tremendous honor, is being able to promote the Sacred Heart, because who doesn't want to serve a king? And further, who doesn't want to serve the King of heaven and earth? If obviously there are many people who don't, but knowing the truth as we do, of course we wish to serve him. And so who does not know who he is, does not wish to serve him. It is an honor. So.
Yeah, wonderful. Ross McKnight is with us, business owner, Backwater Foie Gras, backwaterfoiegras.com. And so in those terms, in that this wonderful opportunity that we have, if we rightly understand it, that Jesus has poured it all out for us. He reveals love itself to us on the cross, gives us the gift of himself in the Holy Eucharist, gives us his Catholic Church. I mean, we have everything. We have this abundance of treasure if we only have the eyes to see. And so the wise thing would be to humbly receive it, and then to strive and be very grateful for it, and then to strive to be faithful in loving him back and in doing what he's calling us to do, to be faithful to him in all the ways that he calls us to do that. So one way that you're answering that call, one help that you have found, that you have been called into, kind of a call within already your vocation to marriage and family, is being a third order Franciscan, which you had mentioned earlier in the program. Anything you want to share on that? I'm sure there are many people who don't even realize something like that might be an option. What can you share with us?
Certainly more than an option. I'd say in the Middle Ages, many lay people were third order Franciscans. Now, I'm under the Marian Friars Minor, so I'm attached to the Marian Friars Minor. They're a very traditional Franciscan order, living very authentic Franciscan spirituality. In fact, at one point, they had been granted a friary by a bishop, and they had filled the friary. So the superior of the order, Friar Anthony, his instructions were to fill the friary with friars and to start a third order. And so he did those things. He filled the friary with friars and he started a third order. And I believe there are about 300 third order members across the United States right now of the Marian Friars Minor. But a new bishop came along and didn't like that he was there and asked, what are you doing here? Who are you and what are you doing? And eventually actually kicked them out of their friary. And so in the middle of winter, with nothing but their habits and their sandals, right? They went outside their friary. They beat their sandals together 3 times, which is the Franciscan tradition. And they walked off down the road with nothing. which is very Franciscan of them. And of course, divine providence looked after them. They're actually in a better situation now than they were before. But it's such a tremendous blessing to have been offered the opportunity to be invested with this third order, because goodness, yeah, I mean, we need people, we need witnesses to the faith. We all need witnesses to the faith, and we all need to see and be in contact with people who are holier than we are. And so having the example of the friars and having an example of my fellow tertiaries has been a tremendous influence on me, and making me wish and desire to grow in holiness, and also to be willing to sacrifice and be willing to suffer, because it is a penitential order also. The Franciscans are a penitential order, which is very appropriate for our day and age, because what we need to be doing is making reparation as often as we can. And so I would recommend that to any Catholic lay person. You don't need to think about it too much. It was made for you, the third order, and it used to be that almost everyone was a third order. And so it fits very nicely into the married life and gives you a plan for prayer with your family, and reminds you to pray throughout the day and on a daily basis, and to make sacrifice. So I heartily recommend it to all.
Yeah, outstanding. Wow. Thank you so much for coming on with us today. Ross McKnight, sharing some of your story, and a lot of great insights and wisdom as well. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me. God bless you. Ave Maria.
Yes, God bless you. Ave Maria. And go to the website, check it out, backwaterfoiegras.com, backwaterduckfarm.com. Get some merchandise, wear it proudly. God bless you.